Greetings everyone, Assalamu alaikum and Ramadan Mubarak. Welcome to our event today, Islamic Chaplaincy in North America, and the launch of the newly released Muslim Chaplaincy book, Mantle of Mercy, published by Templeton Press. My name is Aliyah Khan, and I'm Director of the Global Islamic Studies Center at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. Our center is your host today. I'm pleased to welcome the editors of Mantle of Mercy, Chaplain Muhammad Ali, Chaplain Sondos Kholakhi, and Sister Jaye Starr, as well as Imam Kamau Ayubbi of Michigan Medicine, and Campus Chaplain Dr. Matthew Schumann of the University of Michigan Felicity Foundation, as well as Professor and Moderator Dr. Nancy Khalil. Nice to see some friends and meet some new ones. We at the Global Islamic Studies Center would like to begin by wishing everyone listening and our community Ramadan Kareem. We hope this month brings you peace and fellowship. First, a little about us and our events this year. The Global Islamic Studies Center aims to promote the understanding of global Islamic culture and Muslim societies worldwide, not just in the Middle East, but in Asia, Africa, and the Americas. If you are a student, faculty, staff, or community member who's interested in our talks, film festivals, and research funding, please join our monthly newsletter to stay informed and attend our events. In addition, if you're an undergraduate student, declare our Islamic Studies minor. The minor has no prerequisites and it's 16 credits. You can find more information on our minor page on our website, but please also do reach out and contact us, and we can make sure you have everything you need to declare. If you're interested in graduate programs, check out our Masters in International and Regional Studies with an Islamic Studies specialization. The application deadline is usually mid-December, and you can also find more info on our website. The master's program is 36 credits total and is usually pursued over the course of 2 years. If you're looking for funding, our applications are currently open for undergraduate students, graduate students, and faculty members looking for funding for projects related to Islam and to Muslim societies. Our applications for funding close on April 29th. Please make sure to apply before then. For graduate students, we fund any projects related to Islamic studies and Muslim societies. This includes travel, conference fees, language learning courses, and more. For undergrads, we fund digital internships, language learning, local conference fees, in-person internship stipends, and more. We also have a new graduate fellowship dedicated solely to the study of Black Islam. As part of our ongoing Black Islam in the Americas series that we started in March, and in collaboration with Dr. Saad Abdul Kabir of the Arab and Muslim American Studies Program in American Culture, we have launched the Black Islam Graduate Fellowship Competition, open to all U of M graduate students in relevant fields working in the Americas, Africa, the Middle East, or in Black Muslim communities anywhere else in the world. Applications close on April 29th. So you still have some time. Today's event, Islamic Chaplaincy in North America and the Mantle of Mercy book launch, is brought to you by the Global Islamic Studies Center at the University of Michigan. We'd also like to thank our co-sponsors, our many co-sponsors that made this event possible. At the University of Michigan, the Office of Research at Michigan Medicine, the Institute for Research on Women and Gender, the Department of Comparative Literature, the Center for Middle Eastern and North African Studies, the Department of English Language and Literature, the Department of American Culture, the Institute for the Humanities, the Department of Middle Eastern Studies, the Digital Islamic Studies Curriculum, the Department of Women's and Gender Studies, and the Arab and Muslim American Studies Program. This event is also co-sponsored by the Mantle of Mercy publisher, Templeton Press. If you'd like to keep up with us at the Global Islamic Studies Center, you can follow us on social media, particularly Facebook and Twitter. We are at UMichGISC on both of those platforms, and we also send out a monthly newsletter to which you can subscribe. I'd now like to introduce and welcome Dr. Nancy Khalil, Assistant Professor of American Culture at the University of Michigan, who will be moderating today's event. Dr. Nancy Khalil is Assistant Professor of American Culture at the University of Michigan. She completed her PhD in anthropology at Harvard University and her postdoctoral fellowship at Yale University's Center on Race, Indigeneity, and Transnational Migration. Dr. Khalil's recent large research project studies the politics of American Islam through in-depth research on Islamic higher education institutes and religious clerics, or imams, in the US. Dr. Khalil has worked with a number of nonprofit organizations. Notably, she was one of 4 female founders of the Boston-based Muslim Justice League, and she currently serves on the board for Pillars Fund. Prior to her academic career, Dr. Khalil worked in higher education and student development, including serving as Muslim chaplain at Wellesley College for several years. I'll turn it over now to you, Dr. Khalil.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you to the Global Islamic Studies Center for your excellent work organizing this event. Today we're joined by editors from the newly released Mantle of Mercy, Islamic Chaplaincy in North America. And we also have local chaplains from Michigan, the chaplains with us, as Dr. Khan mentioned, our Chaplain Muhammad Ali, Chaplain Sondos Kholakhi, and Sister Jaye Starr, Imam Kamau Ayubbi from Michigan Medicine, and the Felicity Foundation Chaplain, Dr. Matthew Schumann. I'm going to introduce each of them, and then we'll jump right into a very engaging and riveting conversation I'm expecting. Our first is Chaplain Muhammad Ali. He began his early education at the American Institute of Quranic Studies. He holds a BA in psychology, and he's a graduate of the Bayan Islamic Graduate School with an MDiv, a Master's of Divinity in Islamic Chaplaincy, and an MA in Islamic Education. He's a chaplain in the federal prison, and he's also a Muslim chaplain at Bucknell University. And he also serves at Geisinger Medical Center, so 3 chaplaincy fields. He lives in central Pennsylvania with his wife and 4 children. The next chaplain I'll introduce is Chaplain Sondos Kholakhi. She serves as a volunteer community and police chaplain and as a hospital staff chaplain in Southern California. She's board certified with the Association of Professional Chaplains, and she earned a Master's of Divinity degree as well in Islamic Chaplaincy from the Claremont School of Theology, which houses the Bayan Islamic Graduate School. She's the recipient of the Fathi Osman Academic Excellence Award, and prior to that, she attained a bachelor's degree in English and creative writing from UCLA, where she was a Regent Scholar. Sondos completed 5 units of Clinical Pastoral Education, CPE, and she's the author of an award-winning book, Musings of a Muslim Chaplain, which came out in 2020, and she's also co-editor of the book we're discussing today. Next, I will introduce Sister Jaye Starr. She's an aspiring healthcare chaplain, board member with the Association of Muslim Chaplains, and a member of the Ethics Committee at Michigan Medicine. She's a graduate of the Hartford International University's Islamic Chaplaincy program, and she has 3 units of clinical pastoral education. She also studied with the fellowship at Auschwitz for the study of professional ethics and as a Luce Fellow at Gadjah Mada University in Indonesia, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. She's a convert to Islam living in Michigan with her husband, who is also a chaplain, and their 2 small children. She loves gardening and finds geeking out over Islamic studies and bioethics strangely rejuvenating. I think you're in good company here. The next chaplain I'll introduce is our Michigan's own Imam Kamau Ayubbi. He grew up in Los Angeles, California, and received his bachelor's degree from San Francisco State University in visual art in 1998. During his undergrad, he enjoyed an internship in holistic health studies, and he received his religious and spiritual education and training under the Islamic Supreme Council of America. He was appointed there as an imam in 2002. Imam Ayubbi received his clinical pastoral education, CPE, at Beaumont CPE Center in Royal Oak here in Michigan. Before serving at the University of Michigan Hospital and Health Systems, he worked as a staff chaplain in adult palliative care and in a cardiac progressive care unit at Beaumont Royal Oak from 2010 to 2015. He provides care throughout the hospital for Muslim patients as well as psychiatric spiritual care in the adult inpatient partial program and adolescent psychiatric programs. He loves sharing principles and practices of peace and meditation for all ages. And last but definitely not least, another one of Michigan's own, Dr. Matthew Schumann. He's new to Michigan and he's serving as the Felicity Foundation chaplain at the university in Ann Arbor. He became Muslim in 2009 and his journey has taken him to Morocco, Qatar, Canada, Utah, and now Michigan, quite the journey. He studied Islam and Quran intensively since 2016 as a student of Imam Fodedrame, and he also earned his PhD in Near Eastern Studies from Princeton University in 2020. His goal is to support students' development into absolute citizens, those who are immersed in the remembrance of God, have beautiful character, and find happiness in serving humanity. He resides in Ypsilanti, Michigan with his wife and 2 children. Thank you all for being here with us today. So I'm going to start with a question for everybody that I hope you can all answer, which is, why do you feel called to chaplaincy work?
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi rahman rahim. I'll say sort of my journey towards chaplaincy began very much with, having grown up and studied the Quran, and, in amongst the community of Muslims, and sort of having witnessed various types of spiritual abuse, and the effects on that, on friends, family. And so, my love for the Quran, I think at the beginning felt like something that sort of protected me. And so my interest began as, how can I help others heal from that trauma? That's where some of my interest in psychology came. And along the way, I learned how much I myself had been affected, and how much healing I needed to do. So that sort of, then it became sort of a personal journey of like, how do I heal myself? And over time, that not only is learning about myself and learning about chaplaincy just sort of reconnected me once again to Quran. And not just the Quran, but I think what became more apparent to me was not only was the Quran very basic in terms of addressing the human spiritual need, more so than it was interested in establishing a particular group identity as Muslims. It also highlighted to me the importance of the prophetic relationship with people along with the Quran that contributed to the healing that people needed to progress spiritually. And so that, all of that together, and the opportunity of chaplaincy, which kind of, I think for me, who in the beginning was serving as an Imam, was somewhat of a relief in that it allowed me to step away from the typical, I would say, sort of fiqhi or legalistic perspectives of Islam that you're sort of confined to in those roles, to go back to like the basic essential spiritual nature of the human being, regardless of faith claims and identities and so on. And so that was what spoke to me from the very beginning, and continues to speak to me today.
Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon everybody. Thank you, Dr. Nancy, and for the Global Islamic Studies Center for hosting this event today. Bismillah, in the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. So when I think back to my journey to chaplaincy, there was a pivotal role of community that played a role. So I didn't know chaplaincy even existed as an option. And I, as mentioned in my bio, I was really intent on doing something around writing, creative writing, storytelling. That's really where my heart was. And after graduating with a degree in creative writing, I was like, I'm going to write the American Muslim novel and about the American Muslim experience. And this was, mind you, after 9/11, where a lot of stereotypes and a lot of misunderstanding around the religion was surfacing. And so that was my goal. And then I had kids. And I realized I don't have any time to do anything creative, let alone sit at a computer for hours. And I really started to do a deep dive into some introspection about what do I want to do with my life? What do I want my legacy to be? How do I play a small part in helping to change the world, so to speak? And so I just kept asking people one after another, what do you do for a living? And what do you love about it? And what do you not like about it? Almost like interviewing people. And I just couldn't find the function and the role that spoke to all of these seemingly disparate parts of what I was passionate about, which was interreligious work and storytelling, spirituality, Islam. I love the religion of Islam and I adored it, but the studying of it was missing something for me. All the conferences and all the texts, kind of alluding back to what Chaplain Muhammad was saying, the legalistic side of it, the history, the dates, the names, that's not what was nourishing me. And so I was searching for something more. And it wasn't until 2013 or 2014, my husband and kids and I attended a family camp over the summer. And that's where I met my first Muslim chaplain, Chaplain Sondos Kholakhi, God have mercy on his soul, he passed away a year ago. And he was serving as the chaplain at Princeton University. And so, you know, when I tell this story, I'm reminded of the moment every time that when I saw him before he even said anything, I was really struck by his state, his being. He was just, he filled the air with this gentleness and this compassion and this friendliness and warmth that it was just very striking for me. And I thought to myself, whatever he's doing, that's what I want. And so I followed him around, probably really annoyingly, for the next few days at camp and just said, what does your 9 to 5 look like? And what does a chaplain do? And how do you get there? And how do you become one? And of course, he was so patient and was really kind in mentoring me through that process and told me about, you know, you have to do the MDiv and then you do your CPE and eventually board certification, go for it. And as he was talking about the work that he did on campus, I felt like every part of what I was passionate about, I can suddenly form into a picture. And I knew almost right away that's really what I wanted to do. And so it wasn't until a few years later that I was able to actually enroll in the MDiv program. And then, I remember the first day of orientation at CPE, walking into the hospital, and then being introduced to our cohort, which is also interreligious, and hearing how other people came to this work. And I knew in that moment, this is where I wanted to be, alhamdulillah. And it's just been a nourishing and beautiful journey since. And I'm just so, so grateful to be able to serve in this way. And I don't know for how long I'll be able to do it, but I will always, always be grateful for the time that I have.
It's so beautiful to hear both of your stories. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very, very much to the team that's put this together. I know it was a tremendous amount of work and we're really grateful for that. May God reward you. I, from a very early age, have had an interest in how do we create global peace, just sort of small goals. How do we end war? How do we thrive? In my undergraduate years, I studied theater with the hopes of doing social justice-based theater for healing. But I graduated the year of Katrina and ended up long-term Gulf Coast relief worker. And we did some theater, but that sort of propelled me into more direct disaster relief and humanitarian work. And I found that there was I knew how to wield a crowbar really well. I knew how to do the sort of paperwork trail that I needed to do with the Red Cross, but there was an element of being with people that I was often called to do. And I wanted the skills to do that. And I read a book called Here If You Need Me by Chaplain Kate Bastrap. And it was a light bulb. It's like, oh, right there, those are the skills that I want. And it's called chaplaincy. And I didn't actually want to be a chaplain. I wanted to take the skills of chaplaincy into my disaster relief work, particularly both for the people who are impacted, but also for the disaster relief workers themselves. And then I too had children, and it turns out children make it difficult to do many things, including disaster relief work, deployments, and humanitarian work. But alhamdulillah, at the very end of my chaplaincy academic training, part of the requirement for it was a unit of clinical pastoral education, which requires working as a chaplain in a student capacity in a hospital. And I confess I've had a long-standing but I just pass out around blood and needles. And so I was very concerned that there was no way I was going to be able to get my degree in the end, because I wouldn't be able to get through this semester in the hospital. And what I found was, alhamdulillah, I absolutely loved the work, and loved being part of an interdisciplinary team. And the more and more over the years that I have learned about trauma, the more and more I believe that the way to build world peace, which is a goal I will continue to work towards, is to help individuals in healing their trauma. And that resonates beautifully with chaplaincy work. And so thankfully, I can do very well in the emergency room around all sorts of things now without a problem. And I look forward to getting back to hospital chaplaincy once the kids are a little bit older, inshallah.
Alhamdulillah, this is praise be to God. This is awesome just to hear your stories and to be here with you all. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So I credit my sort of beginnings toward service from my mother. From an early age, she put me in well, she was an example through her art, performing artwork and community work. Just to be of service and to be around, a beautiful community of servants, multicultural, multi-religious, ethnic. So then she put me in kind of like that direction from an early age. And then my encounter with spirituality and faith was definitely a healing-based experience of the divine, of God, of Allah. And that was before I embraced Islam. So this thread of spiritual and psychological health was very much part of my entry into faith, what I would call faith. And then coming into Islam with different practices that I had sort of accumulated, from study of meditation, I kind of kept that orientation of looking for that spiritual dimension, which I found in Tasawwuf or Sufism. So finding Sufi teachers, I was definitely this orientation of self-reflection and healing and trying to learn what it is to heal, which I hear is a common theme. And I, sort of organically moved into this role of being a community-based Imam in Oakland, California, and found myself in situations either doing funeral washing of those who had died, or in the case of being introduced to a chaplain, there was an elderly family who was suffering. The gentleman had congestive heart failure, and his wife had end-stage Alzheimer's. So I ended up doing work in the hospital with them. And in the midst of being with them in the hospital, a chaplain came into the room, and it just clicked. He was actually a Presbyterian African-American chaplain, and we just clicked. And he's like, I could just feel him sort of like reading me, in a loving way, in a caring way. And I was sort of reading him too. And I was like, how do you become a chaplain? So he informed me of CPE, clinical pastoral education, and kind of gave me the information. And I was already thinking of coming to Michigan for other reasons, to be closer to my spiritual teacher, Sheikh Hisham Kabani, who I'd spent a lot of time with in California, but wanted to be closer to him in Michigan. And so I found a CPE center in here in, at Beaumont Hospital, and went and interviewed and walked around the hospital, and just the vibe of the hospital is just sort of like this, like, place where the veils were thin, where there was less pretension, and it just felt kind of a natural thing for me to be in that environment. And so that was the beginning. And I tried to step out of it after one unit of CPE. I was like, nah, this is too much. I need to go back to community gardening or something. But my teacher, Sheikh Hisham, he asked me about chaplaincy. He's like, what's going on with chaplaincy? I'm like, no. And then I got a call to come back for a residency, like the next day, literally. So I haven't turned back since then. And it's been an amazing 16 years.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. I just want to start out and say that it's a great honor for me to be here. I'm definitely the least deserving person to be here today. It was a great courtesy that I was invited, and hearing all of you speak, I've learned so much about myself just listening to all of you in these few minutes. So I'm so happy that I got to be here just for this part. I can't imagine what's going to come later, inshallah. But I guess I never intended to be a chaplain. I was in graduate school studying for my PhD on a very ego-fulfilling course of becoming a new religious intellectual. That's what they call it in religious studies. People who study religion academically and then enjoy a kind of mixed role within a community setting where, you're not, an imam, but you're a doctor and you kind of have opinions on things. And I was very fulfilled by that in a very ego-satisfying way. And fortunately, my wife is a much more sincere person than I am. And so the whole time I was in graduate school, she was calling out to God to send us a teacher. And I had the great privilege, like Chaplain Sondos, of knowing and working with and being mentored by Suhaib Sultan. May Allah have mercy on his soul. Just a beautiful man. And I felt when the first day I met him was a lot like the first impression that you had, Chaplain Sondos. And I did experience so much healing in his presence. And I worked as his assistant. And through him, we brought a scholar by the name of Imam Fode Brame to Princeton to lead a program. And Imam Fode is from the Jahanke clerical family of Senegambia. And for a thousand years, they've been focused exclusively almost on teaching Quran. And so when he came, I had studied Quran academically and also in a madrasa setting, but hearing him speak about it, it was like, wait a minute, I don't know, I've never heard this before, but it's the same verses that I've read. And I realized that, this was a person who could guide me to the Quran. And alhamdulillah, despite my stubbornness and arrogance, Allah made it that I had to go with him. And so like with Chaplain Muhammad, my passion has become the Quran. And when I was studying with him, I spent 3 years studying with him in Vancouver, British Columbia. I was working on my PhD at the same time, and I asked him one day, I said, what should I do after I finish my PhD? And he said, you should live the Quran. I said, okay. That's not a small task. His methodology focuses on these 7 character traits in the Quran that God loves: repentance, candor, excellence, reverence, patience, trusting in God, and being equitable and upright. And so it's a very clear methodology. And I had the opportunity to practice it for 2 years in Utah. I was a public transit bus driver. which was a very humbling experience, and kind of what, like Kamau was saying, an opportunity for me to identify the parts of myself that were actually just veils or dresses, you know, my prestige and my status stemming from my education that I valued so much, and seeing that that wasn't really worth anything ultimately, and that it really came down to the content of my character. And I made, you know, so there's a lot to talk about that experience, but basically it was an opportunity for me to put a lot of what I had learned into practice and learn how to serve people in a very selfless way, in a very thankless way, not looking for their you know, congratulations, you got us here on time. Yeah, that's my job, so alhamdulillah. And there's a lot of parallels between being a bus driver and being a chaplain, but you know, keeping people safe, moving people from point A to point B. And so I was looking for another job, and I just broke down one day because everything I was doing wasn't working, or it was taking me in the wrong direction. And so I said, Allah, I've been listening to myself for so many years, and it's only brought me trouble and pain and hardship. So now you get to decide for me. And I put everything in his hands. I kept doing my job. And 4 days later, I heard from Imam Fode about this job opening. He said that I should apply. And so I applied, and alhamdulillah, I'm here now, and I've become a chaplain.
Thank you all for sharing your personal stories. They're also moving and so different, but there's still so much overlap of, you know, a pursuit of healing for yourselves and others, and of service, and of this commitment to the practice of Islam. I heard that throughout all of your narratives. So I want to shift to the book that, you know, I have my copy here, which I'm not finished with, but so good. And it's the first collection of essays by Muslim chaplains across all the different fields of chaplaincy. So I'll start with a question for the editors and authors in this book among us, which is, are there parts of this book that particularly stand out to you, or that address pressing but little recognized chaplaincy issues? Any essay in the book, perhaps even your own, that you'd like to talk to us about?
Muhammad, take the lead, will you please?
I'll take a crack at that. Again, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I'll talk about my piece, which I think connects in many ways to what brought me to chaplaincy, which is kind of like how do we as human beings get to that essential human spirituality, or that fitri nature, or that innate spiritual nature that God has created us with. And as a student of the Quran, and the Islamic tradition, as one might call it, and having studied psychology, I recognize how human beings so many times over the course of history shift themselves within religious contexts from the very essence and meaning to identity politics, right? Muslim, Christian, Jew, Sunni, Shia, Sufi, all these different names that humans have sort of come up with in terms of ways to identify their particular group, and the many conflicts and stuff and things that come out of that. And so, I wanted to write about my experience as someone who was, for the most part, raised in Shia Islam, a lot of Sufism within that context as well, and looking at the ways in which I was received as a chaplain coming into the prison context, and positive and negative, and how trying to address the essential humanness of us all at times was impeded by those identity politics, right? And how to sort of get past that within my work generally, and even more so, how to get past that within myself. Which for me, there's a book that I would recommend to people interested in chaplaincy to read. If you haven't read it, it's a book called The Wounded Healer, which is really about how we as spiritual caregivers, as pastors, as imams, that in some way, in trying to serve and heal others, it's actually an expression of our own need to heal ourselves. And I will admit that in my chaplaincy it is so much about trying to the outside world being a reflection of what's going on internally. And the more I figure out the ways in which humans work, the more I figure out the ways in which I work. And so, yes, it sounds kind of self-serving, and it is, which is, I find that sort of self-serving acceptable, because for me, it's a purification of it gives me opportunity to purify myself. So I wanted to talk about that and building bridges within Muslim communities in terms of our interfaith relationships. And so I, share stories about that within my work and within my own life.
Which essays stand out for me? It's such a hard question to answer, because it's kind of like, what's your favorite kid? You can't really give an answer for that. But I realized going through the table of contents and kind of really trying to nail it down for myself for the first time, it was interesting for me to realize that the ones that stand out are very similar to the chapter that I offered in the book as well. So I think each one of us will resonate with chapters that speak to our heart. It's a nice question to ask ourselves as we're going through the book. But for me, it was really about the theology of spiritual care, the chapters that spoke to the theology piece, that connected the principles and the practices and the values of Islam with the ministry of chaplaincy and the practice of it. And I think that those chapters really spoke to the 2016 baby chaplain Sundas in the clinical pastoral education program that was yearning for literature or just something that could help support my theological reflection, because the Christians had it in the CPE program and the Jews had it in the CPE program, even the Buddhists had it, and I was flailing, looking for something to point to that could help me connect what I've been doing all my life with what I was learning and the new skills that were emerging for me as a chaplain. And so reading those chapters now, I'm just like, for all the future CPE students, you've got your content and a starting base. That's I think really key, is to say, these are chapters that are offering our perspectives and our experiences as a starting point for the discussion. And I hope, and I know that the editors share this hope, that this is just the beginning of more literature and more publishing and more reflections and more contemplation upon these. And so a little bit about my chapter, I talk about drawing from the 5 pillars of Islam and connecting each pillar with a foundational quality or skill of chaplaincy. And the way this came about for me, I think I had been writing this chapter through my practice of chaplaincy without even realizing it. But at some point, discovering that all this talk that we do about witnessing people and being actively present and doing deep listening and journeying with people, like all of these key words that come up, are found in the very pillars, the very foundation of our beautiful tradition of Islam. That I had been practicing this, or supposed to practice all of these qualities my entire life. So every Muslim, like if we can revisit the way that we approach the practices and the rituals that we have in our faith, rather than doing compartmentalizing them. It's to say, I'm a Muslim on the prayer mat or during Ramadan, or when I'm doing my dhikr. When we talk about Islam being a way of life, how do these practices then go back and inform, I think, what Dr. Matthew was talking about, our character and the way that we are with one another in community? In a way, being a chaplain has helped me be just a better human being, being a better mother, being a better spouse, being a better daughter, being a better sibling, etc. Because it softens you and it refines you, and it gives you some stillness to be able to receive other people. And it's just, it was just a new discovery for me to realize that so many of our practices, fasting that we're doing right now in Ramadan, all of those qualities that we're gaining and benefiting from in the month, are helping us be better people with one another and be better citizens and human beings, right, in the world. So I wanted to start the discussion on that and see, what are other parts of our faith, our beautiful faith, can we draw into our own self-improvement.
So beautiful listening to this, and just witnessing kind of like even, big shout out to the editors who formulated this idea. And, especially for Sondos, because she was like relentless, like, get this done. Now I can see why. Because, it's so much part of her story of being a writer, but also being devoted as, a Muslim and as someone who found that what I called like khidmah, like in Arabic, we have this idea of khadim or khadim. It's like a servant, and that's like my Islamic term for chaplaincy. It's just to do service in a way that I don't want to say is appropriate. It's like in response, kind of like a divine response to life, that intention with a divine intention to find God in being with people and being with community. So like looking into this book, I've just, got my copy a couple of days ago, but, I've just kind of like weaving through it. And for one thing, it's just interesting to get a chance to look into, it's not a heady book. I find it's a heartful book, and it's like getting into the stories of like the hearts of these people who have very different backgrounds, very different experiences, but have done that work that chaplaincy calls to like look into your heart, look into your soul, and figure out, how do you give an offering? How do you offer a listening presence? A big part of the Islamic tradition is being in companionship, sohbah, to be with one another, and so powerful to hear these reflections today with you all. So yeah, that's what stands out to me about the book so far. And I think what I'm getting from it is just the value. For example, there is one called Hurt People. And it sort of starts to examine our human condition as people who want to serve, but perhaps are carrying wounds that might affect, it's just inevitable. What I found in spirituality is that the more I engage it, it gets more messy in some sense. It gets more out of our control. Our ego has like less to grasp onto. But in the midst of that, we're still asked to find the presence of God, so, we could like, I'm starting to feel geeky now that I'm in this group. I'm like, yeah, I feel really geeky right now. But that Hurt People story was sort of about, a very personal journey and allegations of spiritual abuse, and then the quest for restorative practices that, yeah, sometimes people, the response is to ban people from a community or whatnot, but also like this particular author talked about restorative practices and restorative justice and community conversations, which so that's just an example of like these tools that other communities, like the Muslim community, will pick up on and say, oh, what is this? You know, how can we respond to crises that are going to show up inevitably? So, and then for the chapter that I wrote, it's really just an example of, you know, work that's important to me, work that I feel called to, which is the contemplative healing work, and just being with people wherever they come from. We can, whatever background or religious practice that we come from, we can make intentions together. We can set intentions together. We can set the intention for compassion. We can set the intention for awareness. And these collective hearts, when collected in this kind of contemplation and remembrance, creates an environment through which we can see ourselves and each other differently, and freshly and divinely or spiritually. So this kind of mirrors some of the things I've heard from folks speaking already, of course. And that's what my chapter is about, like the qualities of paradise that we don't have to wait until, you know, we pass from this life to start to experience heavenly paradise qualities through each other.
Beautiful. Yeah, I feel similar to Sundas. Like these are all our children. How can we possibly pick? But I think overall, what stands out for me are the ones where chaplains are most vulnerable. There's a lot of talk in the American Muslim community and increasingly globally right now about the role and the work of Muslim chaplains. But so much of what we do is veiled from people's sight. You know, we're doing it behind prison bars or in hospital rooms. You know, college chaplaincy is often sort of the most visible, and yet a huge amount of the work that college chaplains do happens in one-on-one counseling sessions that we don't see up on the stage. I'm really grateful to the authors who are willing to share deeply and honestly and vulnerably about the work that they do to help the American Muslim community understand what chaplaincy really is. I think that there are many beautiful approaches to chaplaincy, and I'm delighted to see several of them represented in this book. But my hope and my prayer is that it will help people. And I think about how when I picked up the book Here If You Need Me, I said, oh, that's it. That's what I want to do right there. That readers may pick this up and say, oh, I want to be a chaplain. Or, you know, when they're in the hospital or their loved one is incarcerated, that they will say, call a chaplain. And even if there isn't a Muslim chaplain in that institution, they will have greater comfort knowing that chaplains serve all outside of our faith traditions as well, to be able to connect with somebody who might be able to help them. And that was also one other thing is that I'm particularly interested in the chapters that sort of hit upon sometimes the intersections in the different roles within the American Muslim, or within the Muslim community, I should say. So as Lena Azhar has a really poignant piece, you'll want your Kleenex box before you read that piece, your handkerchief. It is, mashallah, it's very heartfelt, but it raises this question around end-of-life care when you have an imam who's giving a directive or a fiqh counsel who's giving a directive that's not on the ground, and sort of the divergences and convergences in the different roles that we play, and where chaplains, our specialty, our forte is the pastoral care.
Yeah, I wanted to add one thing that just really touched me is Imam Kamau mentioned the book being a hearty book, and that just it you know, something inside just lit up my heart, whatever you want to call it, and it's so beautiful to hear, because we really tried to make it that. We really tried to steer away from, you know, this sort of academic endeavor of, you know, making absolute claims and these types of things, to try to like really connect people with people. And just in the short time the book has been out, a number of chaplains of multiple faiths who I've come across who've read it. phone never rings.
Call from
they've read it and are all just so touched by it. And that's what we wanted, just that human connection to spirituality that is so universal, that anyone can read it and understand where we're coming from.
Thank you all, and for your initiative to recognize this vacuum and this need for this piece. I think it, and I hope it's just the beginning of many texts in this area. The next question I have, and it's one I hear a lot, and I'm assuming many of you do too, which is, what's the engagement in interfaith work as Muslim chaplains? Do you minister? You mentioned this, Sister Jaye, that you minister outside your faith. Like, what does that mean to minister to non-Muslims? How do you contend, with the various different approaches to Islam and practices among Muslims and beliefs among Muslims?
I can start. So when thinking about this question, ahead of time, I think, as Chaplain Sondos has said, like theologically, what informs that kind of perspective of engaging people in their diversity. And there's a verse that says, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. And indeed, it's highly emphasized that we have honored, the divine has honored human beings. And then there's these other verses like Lord of all the worlds, or mercy to all the worlds. The prophet is the mercy to all nations and all people and all things. So that's really, I think, at the heart of, in a world, as Chaplain Muhammad had said, that is constantly asserting these identity politics, to step into spaces where you might be judged, you might be misplaced by the person who's beholding you or whatnot, but you have a particular intention and focus to connect with the spiritual need of that person, to at least identify, at least acknowledge it and identify it, even if you can't feel it. That's why we have diverse teams of people, and that's what makes this sort of rich. But at the same time, at times you can, even though you might be from a different, so many times we've stepped into a room, like stepped into an ICU, where because you're of a different faith, there's a spiritual issue that you might be able to address, specifically not changing that person's faith tradition, but just offering like maybe something that you uniquely carry with you, as a human being to another human being. Of course, for me, like I would say, as all chaplains would say, it's rooted in your own spiritual practices and traditions, but, being able to sort of coexist and be in this communication on different levels, from either theological, but very much from a heart and soulful place. And so I think finding that honor in people, it's something that is a struggle every day, because we're getting the opposite messages all the time. We're getting messages of war, we're getting messages of sectarianism and all this stuff. So it's like a constant, like we call it jihad. It's an effort. It's an intentional effort. So yeah, that's to start it off.
Bismillah. Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with everything. And I think, as Chaplain Muhammad mentioned in his, early on, like the Quran is such a powerful resource for me in this regard, because it's a book of the heart. It was revealed onto the heart of the Prophet, peace be upon him. And it's all about how to have a good heart. And everyone has a heart, and everyone is wanting to be at peace, regardless of what you believe. You're always searching for contentment. And so in my work on campus, first to the Muslim students, when I'm, leading a sermon or doing any kind of religious teaching, it's always Quranically based because everyone reads the Quran. And it's always focused on these universals, whether that be matters of the heart or matters of character that transcend those identity boundaries, because anyone can talk about character. It's applicable across any human being. And so I'm very deliberate in that because I want everyone to not only feel included, but also feel like they have access to me within my religious perspective. And in addition to that, I have been very deliberate not to, emphasize that I'm a Muslim chaplain on the campus. Every week I go into the cafe in the central building on campus, and I have this sign, it says chat with the chaplain, not chat with the Muslim chaplain. And because again, everyone has a heart, and the Quran talks a lot about fear and grief. And it always mentions that the people close to Allah, la khawfun alayhim wa lahum yahzanun, that they have no fear and they have no grief. And so we can understand that these are two major obstacles that people have in life, confronting fear and confronting grief. So just when I sit and listen to people, I'm trying to listen for their heart. Where is the heart? And then what's the best way for me to respond to that? Because as Kamau rightly said, not only do we follow in the footsteps of a prophet, peace be upon him, who was sent as a mercy to everyone, but we all have the same creator, and the truth is universal. So it's important for me in my testimony to that truth to make it close to all the people I engage with, regardless of who they are.
Chaplaincy of the heart, so beautiful. Thank you, all of you. When experts talk about chaplaincy, you typically hear 4 different fields. You hear about the collegiate and university setting, you hear about the hospitals, the prisons, and the military. But they're not the only fields. There's corporate chaplains, for instance, which, are under, I think, attended to. Are there Muslim-specific institutions or sites where chaplains serve? What's the difference between all of these different areas of chaplaincy and the different constituencies that you serve? Can some of you speak to that?
Yes. I think I find it interesting, and something connected to me with the previous question. It was thinking about we all have to remember that the Prophet ministered to non-Muslims, right? The Quran ministered to non-Muslims. It walked people through a journey from complete ignorance towards a society based on, the many legal principles that we identify as Islam. So the Quran, as Chaplain Matthew mentioned, is such a universal tool. I've had the honor of working in 3 different chaplaincy institutions. So in prisons and hospitals. I did the CPE, Clinical Pastoral Education and Hospital, and also doing so now, and university. And I think we've talked about already just that universal humanness and the chaplaincy of the heart that is always universal. Humans experience pain and joy and challenges and sadness and grief and anger. So they're all the same in that sense, but then the institutions differ. One of the major differences, I would say, is the amount of time you have with people, right? In the hospital, you may see someone one day and they're discharged by the end of that day, right? Or 2 days or 3 days, some longer and some even longer. But there's a lot of short-term relationships that you sort of build rapport. You try to build that rapport fairly quickly to where you can connect with that person and have those deep conversations, or even not so deep conversations that help them walk their journey. University, you have people for 4 years at least, typically, right? So you may be able to kind of, as I do, to kind of map out, okay, here's where these students are today, and let me think about where we can, how we can walk with them for the next 4 years, and think about that sort of endpoint for those students. And in prison, I have people who were there for life a lot of times. Of course, people transfer from different prisons, so you always have that, this might be the last time I see this inmate because it could get transferred tomorrow. But generally, people are there for a much longer time, but it's not as specific as university. It's not 4 years. It's a long time, but it could be a month, 2 months. It could be tomorrow. So you can, and it's always changing. The prison community is always changing. There's not like a cycle of 4-year cycles because people transfer in and out. So the length of time is the big difference. And then the specific cultures of the different environments. Universities, tend to be a lot of wrestling with beliefs and theology, and a lot of identity, a lot of event planning, which is very specific to university. I know for me, sometimes I feel like an event planner more than dealing with spirituality some days. In prison, it's quite the opposite. There's all people are at least the people who attend to chapel and chaplains are in very deeper conversations. The exploration of faith is very much a focal point of people who have by society standard failed and are just looking for some ways to uplift themselves. So the conversations are it's not really about food. I mean, there are food accommodations and advocacy that's done in all of these settings. But the sort of the institution takes care of that, with the help of chaplains to establish halal food and such. So the length of time, and then the particular culture of these contexts, right? If you go to military, you're dealing with, a culture that you can read Chaplain Jamal Bey's piece about feeling that isolation within the military culture of being a Muslim while the country is at war with multiple Muslim countries, people who come from, generational sort of patriotism and see Muslims as the enemy, and sort of feeling isolated in that context, sometimes feeling you need to hide your faith. But ultimately all of this, is really about the basic humanness of connection, and then sort of navigating these contexts.
I think Chaplain Muhammad summarized it really well, mashallah. I have had also the honor of serving primarily as a healthcare chaplain, but I'm also volunteering as a community chaplain for the past few years with the MDiv, which is a Muslim nonprofit third space organization in Southern California. So I do office hours virtually or over the phone. And then even more recently, just started volunteering very, very part-time with my local police department in my city. And so when I think about the different ways that I navigate each setting, I think that it comes down to who is your congregation, if we can use those terms, like who is your audience, who's your congregation, and what is it that binds them? What is their sense of belonging to that group? And from there stems then this assessment of what are their needs, and then what are the interventions or what are the resources then that I can provide and pull in from my proverbial Rolodex. And one thing that I found really interesting existing or experiencing each one of these spaces is that a lot of times the expectation informs my function. So the expectation of my audience, or the expectations of the congregation, or the expectations of the group that I'm serving will kind of keep me in check as to what parts of chaplaincy or what skills I need to bring in or emphasize more. And so, for example, at the hospital, there's a sense of urgency. It's like in the right here, right now. We're in the midst of the crisis. Those initial stages of grief that are surfacing, the anger, the denial, the shock, that's really where we're holding space for a lot of that as it's unfolding, like right here, right now. In community chaplaincy, there's time lapse, like the crisis will have occurred or has been occurring, and then once I get on the phone with somebody, we're sitting and like taking the time to untangle and work through all of those stories and kind of receiving the narrative and trying to figure out, okay, from in the 30 minutes, where do I need to point you, in which direction, and to whom, in order to continue your healing journey. A lot of the issues that come to me in community chaplaincy revolve around or involve relationships, either relationship with one and their Lord, or relationships with family members, with in marriage, et cetera, et cetera. It really boils down to relationships a lot of times. And police chaplaincy, I don't feel qualified to speak to that yet because I really am just a few months into it. I've only done just a few ride-alongs with some of the officers and done some general introductions. But, some really great conversations with the officers around why they got into police work, and kind of trying to understand and navigate the challenges. But above all, right now I'm focusing on building trust. I think trust is a big theme throughout all of the settings that the chaplain comes. I don't think any of us in this room take for granted that we're allowed into spaces where people otherwise wouldn't be able to be. There's a title given to chaplains, or this concept of intimate stranger. And I really love that, like the juxtaposition of those words, because a lot of times that's how it feels, an intimate stranger. I have no idea who this person is. Aside from university setting, I probably will never see them again. And yet I'm bearing witness to and involved in this chapter in their story that is maybe life-changing or one of the most defining. And like, here I am as one of the characters in the room, and like how humbling and what an honor that is. But there is still that element of trust that we need to build, that rapport and that connection that comes before anything else. And so that's really what I'm starting with the police chaplains.
Thank you all for sharing. I think it clarifies a lot, and recognizing your audience is so important across so many different fields, chaplaincy included. So I do want to note to our attendees, if you have questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A. We'll be looking through those and having some time towards the end, hopefully to get to as many of them as we can. In the meantime, I have many questions that I will lead us with as you guys formulate your own. The next one that I would like to talk about, and I see this here, like Imam Kamau, you use the title Imam. We have people, Dr. Matthew uses the title Doctor. We have chaplains. The titles vary. And one of the questions that often emerges is, what is a chaplain relative to an imam or a sheikh? How do they differ? What does it mean in the US versus outside the US? Do you guys have thoughts to share or some knowledge around any of that?
I'm not an imam nor a sheikh, but I can speak a little bit to the part around chaplaincy outside of the United States and Canada. I'm very privileged to be a part of Ziyara Spiritual Care, which I'm specifically a board member with Ziyara Spiritual Care, which focuses on international chaplaincy, so bringing chaplaincy to Muslim countries. And this is an initiative that's headed by and founded by Dr. Chaplain Muhammad Ali. And a few years ago, I was generously and graciously invited to accompany him to Malaysia to do some training there for their ustads and ustadas. And that's the term that they use for, I guess, the kind of equivalent of chaplain, or the religious guide at the hospital. And so we were doing like very chaplaincy 101, CPE based, very basic principles that we were bringing in. And what I noticed when we were rounding with these ustads and ustadas and units in the hospitals in Kuala Lumpur is that it was mostly a ritual-based focus on, there's a verse in the Quran that is talking about enjoining what is good and forbidding what is evil. And so this kind of personal mission to correct the religion or the practice of the patient, rather than sitting and listening to what their needs are, what their pain is. Again, back to this kind of heart language that we were using, it was focused very much on the legality of it. For example, it was part of their work to administer, tayammum or wudu kits, which is like the purification before prayer, to every patient there, to make sure that they were praying every prayer. That nurses were instructed, for example, to make note of the patients who were not waking up for the morning prayer, for Fajr prayer, and let the ustad know so that they can come and give them that guidance. So it was very prescriptive, very heavy on the guidance of, let's make sure that all your practices and rituals are in order, and then you will be spiritually sound and healthy. And yes, while there is an element of that, an element of truth in that, there's a lot more that needs to be discovered and uncovered, kind of if we're looking at it from an iceberg. And so I'm really proud to announce on behalf of Sierra that they just completed the first CPE unit today, I believe. They had their final evaluation with 10 students in Malaysia, where we brought 2 CPE educators, one of whom is Chaplain Tahara Akmal, who is the first and only, I believe, Muslim female CPE supervisor or educator in the United States. And she was co-supervising this group of 10 students in Malaysia, and it was an interdisciplinary team of, I think, palliative care physicians and those in psychiatry and others. I'm not sure of the makeup of the group exactly. But it was very interesting to hear kind of their experiences bringing these CPE principles, this training principles, the sitting with people, being with people, to Malaysia, working within the context there. And I'll let perhaps the brothers speak to the other question.
I think Chaplain Muhammad was going to speak on the,
Yes, I think I want to. I struggle with sort of the differences between chaplains and imams, as we call them, in the sense that I think all of us are trying to sort of understand that prophetic model in our communities, and I think just expectations, as Chaplain Sondos mentioned, about the different contexts can often sort of dictate, what sort of facets of that prophetic leadership are needed in a given context. On the other hand, I think that there's a level of, chaplaincy in some ways emerging out of a certain sort of lack of familiarity with the context in which chaplains serve on the part of imams. Even sometimes, depending on the individual, a lack of understanding with just the context of North America, in terms of like, if you come from particular countries, what an imam looks like to you, and you've always experienced as an imam, and you come to a country, you sort of mimic what you've always experienced as the imams who you grew up watching, which may not fulfill the needs necessarily of the community around you. And as Sundas said, there's a lot of sort of correction, and I think there's something I've heard from Sundas, Chaplain Sondos, many times, this idea of connection before correction, right? And I think for chaplains, our focus is on the connection part of it, which for me is the first step to correction, right? If we look at the model of the Prophet in the Quran and the way in which it was revealed, Allah didn't throw everything at people right away. He established the Prophet as Sadiq and Amin first. He established the Prophet as an advocate for social justice first. He established the Prophet as looking out for the needs of people first, of helping people connect in brotherhood and all of that. And then we see how progressively over time the do's and don'ts start to come, and the prohibitions and so on and so forth. So I think that model is there within the prophetic example, but I think we have to admit that what we see as an imam and leader within Muslim communities has been very much dictated by the various cultures in which they emerge, right? So there's no like, an imam looks like this. No, well, an imam in Pakistan looks like this, an imam in Iraq looks like this, imam in Iran looks like this. You have Sufi, shuyukh who operate, obviously in a very different way. So I think just the context matters, which is like, I think probably the biggest thesis of studying Islam for the last 30 years of my life is that context matters. And, and we're just in different contexts, I think, in many ways. And I think it takes time, even for chaplains, me having gone to different contexts, to kind of figure out what's needed in this particular context. And I think collectively, as Muslims in America, the role of imam has still been trying to figure that out. Some more than others. If you go to the Black American community, the imam role has been in many ways very different than Pakistani or Arab communities who've migrated here. So I don't know how much that answers the question, but at least explores the question of those sort of differences.
Yeah, from my experience, I've definitely been, like, I was about 4 years as a community-based imam in a small masjid in North Oakland, right? It was labeled the Sufi Mosque by the other masajid because tasawwuf was less in the public eye or even part of what was spoken of on the minbar, right? But like, it's, for me, it was about service. It's like, I feel like in some sense, I'm doing the same thing that I was doing before. A lot of listening, a lot of counseling, gentle advising, and recognizing that there are people who specialize in fiqh and, jurisprudence, and that has a specialized role, but also like trying to understand my edges and my specialty and my limits. What I can't be everything to every person and every culture, and that's okay. And one thing that I was saying, thinking about when Sondos was speaking, is about like expectations of that different cultures have of you in like the chaplaincy context, for example, like in the NICU, the newborn intensive care, right? There's a certain culture up there. And I was assigned to that when I first came to Michigan Medicine. I took the place of the previous chaplain who was covering the newborn intensive care. So they're like, what is an imam doing coming up here? There was pushback. that I heard about coming into that environment, which was probably very Judeo-Christian, sort of certain like social economic thing. And I had to make my intention and step into that space and establish myself as the spiritual care provider on a regular basis. And so it was just really interesting, this idea of expectation and what you bring uniquely as a chaplain, what your background is, what your specialty, what drives you into as a human being, how that is in conversation with certain other cultures, you know, a culture of a newborn intensive care, you know, and I focused a lot actually on staff care in my role there, because what I'm passionate is about of like spiritual health. And so that was a need that I saw that I could help serve on the unit, making self-care or soul care, which I like to term it, more part of the culture. So anyhow, this just bringing up some ideas that this isn't even, from what I'm hearing, there's this constant evolution of context, as was saying. It's like, who are the people drawn and attracted to this field, and how is who they are educated into that field and also informing the field. So
there's a statement in philosophy that says, you know, فاقد الشيء لا يعطيه. You know, the one who is lacking in something cannot give it. And I think that every role, as Imam says, is about what you bring to the role. So if we narrow this down, I think the biggest difference is what is the training, right? The training that chaplains get, go through CPE in terms of cultural awareness, the evaluation of self in the particular way that sort of chaplains have done it, personalizing their own sort of theology, the many different, we could go through down the list with all of the, the training that we have, is a difference, right? Like if you come into a context and you studied fiqh your whole life, that's what you can give. And alhamdulillah, that's a part of the puzzle. But I think, chaplains, and there are also, and I want to say this as well, there are also many imams who have, a broad training, who are operating like chaplains in their context, right? They're I don't want to use the word more evolved, but I would say more well-rounded. So that's why sometimes the line can be a bit blurred, because we as human beings, we are different, and we bring different tools to the table.
Yeah, and if I could chime in too, I think that sometimes it's the intersection both of the training and the context. There's a mashallah, incredibly well-trained chaplain in the UK who says something to the effect of, when people come to me in my role as a mufti, my job is to give them my interpretation of what is the correct legal action for them to take. When I am preaching as an imam in the masjid on Friday, my job is to guide the people and instruct the people in what is, that masjid and my understanding of the deen. And when I meet people in the hospital as a chaplain, my job is to compassionately accompany them through whatever they're experiencing. And there are times when all of those intersect and merge. And chaplains, and one of the beautiful things about Islamic chaplaincy right now in America is that we do have chaplains coming in from so many different backgrounds that are able to bring different complements to it, and who have different ways of engaging as a result. But I think oftentimes when people come to chaplains with fiqh questions, they are often not fiqh questions if you just go a little bit below the surface. And that's a steep learning curve, because we have often sort of learned to think through the lens of fiqh. There was a question in the chat about women's experiences, and Dr. Nancy, you, as you framed that question earlier, asked about titles. And one of the parts of trainings that comes up around this has deep connection with this question of title. So I didn't use the title chaplain today. I am not currently institutionally affiliated, though I've been working to support Muslim chaplains in other roles for some time now. because the definition of a chaplain is one who serves in an institutional context. For our male counterparts, it's very easy to stay an imam. You know, when you leave the hospital at 5 o'clock, or when you leave the prison at 8 o'clock, you can leave your chaplain job and stay in your imam title in many ways. When female chaplains go to speak or participate in a program, we don't necessarily have the same access to that. Our Christian counterparts are reverend, and our Jewish counterparts are rabbis. But there's a sort of articulation of or dance of trying to figure out what is the title that works with us. Some are certainly a sheikha or an ustada. Those are not trainings that are sort of relevant for me. And I think one of the other challenges is that even the term chaplain itself among Muslim chaplains is a frequent source of conversation. So for those who have been in the field for a long time, I've sort of seen generally that people have embraced it and felt that it's the most apt. But as new people are constantly coming into the field, there's a re-examination. Should we be using the term chaplain, or should we have some other title that goes with it? The argument goes something of the sort, university students don't know from abroad, they come in and they don't know what a Muslim chaplain is. I am of the mindset that it's easier to teach them what a Muslim chaplain is than to try to teach the entirety of the campus about what various other Arabic-based terms are that we might take. And I don't really think that the work that we do fits into any one of those existing terms. So I think it would still need definition. There are other challenges, though, that Muslim women face, and I'm excited by the way that COVID has actually changed this drastically, because we've had the opportunity to have access to so many more female Muslim religious leaders as a result of the Zoom platform and of other virtual conferences and things. I grew up Unitarian Universalist. I was accustomed to seeing women on the pulpit preaching and leading congregations in that role. So many of my fellow female Muslim chaplains have talked to me about how they didn't know what that looked like before. And now, alhamdulillah, I think we're seeing more and more of it. Preaching is different than teaching. And chaplains are often called to be in a role that bridges those together. So I'm excited to see that. Another part of it is the isolation. So within their local Muslim religious leadership landscape, women are often not a part of that. Where Sundas, mashallah, is a sort of rare example, because she's actually part of the Imam's council where she is. And I think at least from my vantage point, that it's been a really beautiful partnership, that she's been able to assist them and that they've been able to assist her. I know Sohaib, may God have mercy on him, and Kaiser Aslam in New Jersey have also both, Kaiser talks about this in his essay in the book. They've have really beautiful, rich partnerships through sort of local organizing. Female Muslim chaplains often have a little bit of a harder time sort of finding our seat at the table. I think in ways that are challenging for us, but I think it was also a loss to the community, unfortunately, to bring that piece to the table. And Sundas, are there things you'd like to add there?
I think you did a beautiful job summarizing it, Jay, and so much of your experiences resonate with me as a Muslim female chaplain. The same struggle about this title, walking into rooms, I wrote about it as well. Writing is how I process and thinking about, like, in real time, I walk into a room and I can't use the word imam to give them some other adjective in addition to chaplain to help them understand what I'm there for. Are you a nurse? No. Okay, you're not an imam unless you're some rogue imam, which I'm not. I'm not trying to be one. And what I really enjoyed about that struggle, I can say now, many years later, is that it really helps me to hone in on claiming the title of chaplain for myself. And that kind of goes along with this idea of pastoral authority. Something that we call it in the chaplaincy world is owning your authority in the room as a pastoral presence. And that was a challenge for me to do, because as Jay mentioned, as a Muslim growing up in the Southern California community, I saw many examples of Muslim female leadership generally. So maybe they weren't preaching or teaching, but they were running schools and running institutions and chairing boards and being heads of financial, opportunities and things like that. But spiritual leadership was a piece that I had to get comfortable around. And alhamdulillah, thank God, as Jay said again, I think now we're starting to see more Muslim female spiritual leaders take on that pastoral authority for themselves and become a little bit more publicized and public in partnership with our male and brother counterparts, which I think is really beautiful. And I think that this is really important for our community to see, not only because we as women have a different experience of life and religion and spirituality, and we can speak to that and speak to the other 50% or 51% of the community, but also that we can receive those who are in need of care and who may not feel comfortable going to a Muslim, male chaplain or an imam. So I know, like at the Majlis, when we offer office hours for pastoral care, we have 2 women spiritual caregivers and 2 male spiritual caregivers. And the vast majority of those who utilize my office hours are female, and there's a reason for that. There are ways that we understand one another, that they can open up to me in ways that they can't with somebody else. And for me, not having that growing up, it's a real privilege to be able to step into that space for somebody else, or try to at least. And the last thing I'll say is that recently, my daughter, who's 14, expressed interest in studying the tradition, like more formally, and going into maybe a scholarship role. And it just made my heart sing to think that she could even see herself in that position. And I know that that's very, very directly tied to Sheikha Muslima Permal, who is the co-director and co-founder of the Majlis, who's classically trained and did her degree and serves in that function. And my daughter was her student and is her student. And that she's able to see that emulated as a possibility for herself, that she can think like, I can do that too. And so inshallah, many, many more in the pipeline.
Thank you all. There's a question on just ministering to marginalized communities, and we spoke about women as a marginalized community. The book Mantle of Mercy has an essay about ministering to LGBTQ Muslims and community members. And so as chaplains, how do each of you see your role in spiritual care for Muslims around issues related to sexual difference and sexuality? And I'll ask you, because there's a question in the Q&A, to restate what is chaplaincy. We had a latecomer, so if we can just define that as you answer, so all of our audience members can contextualize your responses.
Does anyone want to answer that one? That one is always like, what's your 30-second elevator speech for what is a chaplain? Do we all have the same one, or are they different? I'm so curious. Well, mine, what I generally tell people, like the textbook definition of it is, for me, is emotional and spiritual support. So providing emotional and spiritual support to those experiencing crisis. That is a chaplain.
Sundas, I think maybe it's helpful if we add a couple of concrete examples. So in a hospital setting, this might look like showing up when there's trauma around birthing. Imam Kamau mentioned earlier, working in the neonatal intensive care, I've supported families when there's been miscarriage or stillbirth situations. It could look like supporting somebody after they've had an amputation, or when they received a difficult diagnosis, or when their loved one has received a difficult diagnosis. In a correction setting, it may look like teaching a class or delivering a death notification. Preaching is an integral part of leading the Friday Jummah, but also can help with mediating conflict and helping people to hold up their stories and journey towards healing. In the military, so importantly, in all of their institutions, most chaplains are serving the entire population. So we have Muslim military chaplains where they may have almost no Muslims in their military unit, and they are the chaplain for the unit itself. There's a lot of talk right now around addressing moral injury. A core part of the work there and in other areas is facilitating religious practices. And so that may look like the Muslim chaplain actually setting up things for the Christian worship service. So they're not actually the one who's delivering, they're not doing the preaching, but they are bringing in the volunteers and setting up the chairs and arranging, all of the logistics around that. There's help with people who are struggling when they've had unit members die, or when they're fearful of a deployment, or struggling with that question, what does it mean to be a Muslim in the US military fighting in a Muslim land? I think college campus, there was a little bit more hit upon earlier, but college is a huge time of identity development. For Muslims, it's also a time when they're being exposed to Muslims who do things really differently than they may have, whether it's, Shia Muslim encountering Sunni Muslim, or more often it's suddenly you're in this mix and you have immigrant family origins that are Arab and Desi, and you have indigenous African Americans, and everybody's coming in with different ways that they have done things, and there's figuring out how to help people navigate that. And questioning things that they may have heard in their homes as being defined, this is Islam or this is Muslim, and suddenly they're hearing other experiences of what that is. The question that you just sort of fed in with the question of what's the role of the chaplain vis-a-vis LGBTQ accompaniment is one that I know chaplains in all of these contexts have journeyed with, because chaplains in some ways aren't imams. Oftentimes, I think we are people that feel safer for somebody to come to and speak to. A core part of the work of a chaplain is non-judgmental presence. And so how do we accompany people with what they're struggling with, and to help hold space, to help them in their journey, to just provide accompaniment, because it can be so incredibly isolating. So I hope that gives a little bit of a kind of a touch of what chaplains do in different contexts, and feeds in with that. And I pass it to my colleagues here.
Just in summary, I was thinking a chaplain addresses the spiritual needs within an institution, right? So it's not just about the patients or the prisoner. It can be staff, it can be, the president of a company, or even that is served by the spiritual support and help of the chaplain.
So I'm cognizant of time. A couple of our chaplains need to go to their jobs as chaplains. So they might be departing. But there is a question from the audience that I want to share. And then I'm going to add a question for our local chaplains on the local work that's happening at the university and here. But if I click this, all right. So this question here asks about being a chaplain in the military or in the police. The person asking says it seems to them that it goes against the social justice frame that you spoke about earlier, Chaplain Muhammad. Do you agree with that? Do you find that there's dissonance there? And if so, can you answer?
I think that I don't find that there is, although I understand the perception that there would be dissonance serving in such context. Again, I want to go back to looking at the prophetic model and looking at the way in which the Quran came into a society with all types of immorality or injustice, and it built itself over time. The Prophet didn't come into Mecca, come into Medina, and just say, all this stuff you guys are doing are wrong. We need to flip the society completely upside down, right? So at times the Prophet was preaching in the context of polytheism all around him. At times he was preaching and ministering to people who were still drinking alcohol. At another time he was, another time later he was preaching to a society where alcohol was forbidden. And so I think that what we do is we start from the basic essential spirituality of human beings in whatever context, right? Because the world is full of context. We can't say that, one society or one context, because there may be some evil there, is not deserving of connection and presence. And as the Prophet was sent, a mercy to all of mankind. And so are these, are these people not part of mankind? Are these systems not part of mankind? And so to be in a system where there are Muslims who need support, where there are people of faith who need support, or people questioning who need support and answers, where there are people who have these false ideas because they have never met a good example or model of what it means to be a Muslim or be connected to a fellow human being who they later might find out, oh, that was a Muslim. They were a really kind person. They were really present when I spoke with them, right? They listened to me. And to have minds and hearts shifted and changed. So while there seems to be dissonance, I think if we sort of break things down to what it is to be essentially human, it's an act of compassion to be willing to go into these very difficult situations and try to be sometimes a voice of reason, sometimes a compassionate ear, right? Sometimes just present in case someone has the courage to ask questions. I don't see any contradiction there. Obviously, chaplains don't go into the military or to prisons and sort of champion their agendas. They work within an existing institution and structure and support the people within. And surely there are conflicts that come up, but overall, it's the same prophetic sort of responsibility, right? To send compassionate in every part of this world.
I think Chaplain Muhammad did a beautiful job addressing that. I agree with everything that he said. And I just actually want to ask permission from everybody, my panelists, co-panelists in the audience, to head out. I'm going to need to take off. So I give my heartfelt salams and thank you and gratitude to all of you, my beloved co-panelists and friends and hosts. And just thank you guys so much for having us and for helping us launch the book. And I hope everyone can get a copy and read it and give us your feedback. We'd love to hear from you guys. And as it came up before, hopefully this is just the beginning of many, many more books on this topic and in this field, inshallah. So thank you all so much. Jazakallah khairan.
Thank you, Chaplain Sondos. So the next question that I have is a local one, and then I have two questions in the Q&A that I'm going to merge into, I think, a really great closing question for all of us. But this question is for our Felicity Foundation chaplain, Dr. Matthew, and Michigan Medicine chaplain, Imam Kamau. What have you found are the specific issues that are important to U of M students pastorally, to the faculty, the staff, parents? Do you find that their experiences diverge from other chaplaincy experiences you've had, or is there anything unique to the Michigan context?
Yeah, I don't have a lot of experience to draw on, but I think, from my own experience as in the academy, there's a lot of different things that are going on through the college experience that, as Sister Jaye pointed out, it's a time of identity formation. And so it's kind of, what I see is it's about being a steward of the students and providing them a space within which they can define, who they want to be, not only, with regards to career, but also, and more importantly, with regards to their faith. Because what I find, and I find in myself, there's a moment in everyone's life when they have to choose who they want to be, and they have to choose if they want to be, the same person they were raised to be by their parents, or if they want to be someone else. And I've gone through that, I think, many times in my own life. And it's what I see in the students. I think something that's particular to the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, is that, one, it has a very large Muslim population of students. Southeastern Michigan has a lot of Muslims, as everybody knows. And it's extremely diverse, which is a beautiful thing because we can celebrate so many different Muslim cultures. at the same time, everyone is bringing in their own points of view and methodologies and schools of thought into the religious space. And so one of my very important and very intentional roles through my chaplaincy, as I said earlier, is to create kind of a universal Islamic religious space where not so much where those identities are broken down, but more they dissolve into that same space, so that everyone can kind of experience what it's like to deal with people on a level of heart to heart, instead of, you know, on a level of religious law or on a level of theology. And that's why Quran is really central to that, because we can all relate to the Quran equally as Muslims. I think, you know, in the experience that I've had so far, one of the topics that I find myself returning to a lot is about how do we deal with the fear of the unknown in the future. And that was one of the lessons that I had to learn, because what the Quran teaches us is that faith is the antidote to fear, in that faith being that we trust God, and we know that we don't know what the future is going to bring, but that He knows, and that we trust that God is always working in our best interest. And a lot of the anxiety that students feel in relationship, you know, related to their career or their academics, it's all about, you know, seeking a certain outcome. And they're given a lot of paths to do that, but those paths don't always yield the results that they desire. And so how do we respond to situations where, you know, God's will is intervening with our expectations for our personal life? And in my experience, it's about, you know, learning how to let go and how to go with the flow and how to follow the path that's being led in front of a person, rather than trying to, you know, hold on to what we thought we were going to do. And it's not, that's, you know, alhamdulillah, I've had some very beautiful moments with that, but it's also very hard, you know, to have that discussion with young people, because they're very sure of who they want to be, but and there's a lot of agony when you can't be the person that you want to be. And so responding to that is very important, I've found, in my current capacity.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Matthew. On the student side, you know, in the hospital setting, right, you have so many different sort of subcultures, as you know, within different units, and I end up sort of moving through all these cultures. And when I do Muslim patient care, I'm moving from NICU all the way to, you know, SICU, like surgical intensive care, for example. So it's just interesting, specifically as a Muslim chaplain, sort of teaching by caring, you know, providing the care, trying to provide, you know, if I could say, like, even blessed work, you know, blessed help, you know, for whatever scenario that we might be in. People learn from that, right? Because, like, for example, I had a nurse help me do a janaza washing for an infant who was, you know, stillborn, 34, I think it was like a 34-weeker or 21-weeker. There's a couple that happened in the past, you know, a couple months, but just having staff like participating in that, learning about what are Muslims, you know, needs in these circumstances, and how does it sort of connect to their sense of the sacred, perhaps, you know, that's, or, you know, on the other hand, dealing with like brain death, a situation where there's a brain death discussion, and you know, accompanying the family and trying to navigate how to accept that and how to make sense of that, along with their community clergy opinions, a family, you know, input, but of course the dealing with the legal aspects and sort of like the medical understanding of brain death, and sort of navigating that space and learning together from that. So these are some of the things. I think in psychiatry and spiritual care, I think there's a I think there's a reverence and a respect from our staff, but it's just like the interdisciplinary talk about, you know, when something's so close on the pie and you're kind of like, well, how do we really like fully integrate this, and how much time and effort in integration takes? It's just being realistic of what we can do to just provide quality spiritual support for people who are having psychiatric issues, and that the staff can learn from that and maybe embrace some of those ideas and principles as part of, you know, in conversation with DBT, for example, dialectical behavioral therapy. So like that, those are my thoughts right now.
Thank you both. I'm cognizant of time, but I'm gonna share this last question, and I don't know if one of you wants to take it to close us out, and I'm combining two here, but they're asking about what you love about working as chaplains, and they're also asking about what happens when you're burnt out or you're in a torn in a context of conflict. How do you handle that?
I'll answer some of that. You know, I think I've said it a number of times in this session. What I love is to be able to, and I think we talked a little bit about titles and identities. When I was doing CPE, after having, you know, been an imam and masjid context, what I really loved was being able to walk into a room without any sort of garb on, and speak to a person at a very deep level as human beings. And then later, those sort of identity markers come up and it's like, wow, right? Like, we just connected at this deep level, but you're a Christian or you're an atheist or you're, and on their part, you know, I just had a deep conversation about faith and reality with a Muslim. And so I think that is, that along with, you know, being a student of the Quran, and one of my favorite sort of area of study with the Quran, and I think I've alluded to it multiple times, is thinking about the process of the Quran. I think one of the challenges that we have is a book that was revealed over the course of 23 years and develop people through these different stages and develop ideas through different stages. We look at the end of the 23 years and we just want to take that as a cookie cutter and just go stick it everywhere in the world, right? And I think for me, more and more as a chaplain, I see the beauty of that process, right? Why did people we're not told to stand up and pray right away? Why are people not told to fast right away? Why are people allowed to drink alcohol at the beginning stages, right? Why did the prophet not just grab everything and destroy it, right? And it speaks to that sort of compassionate, developmental nature which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intended for the human being to walk them through that journey, not just upend everything and leave people traumatized. And I think there's a great beauty in that with the Quran that I think is far, far too neglected. And so for me, chaplaincy is an actualization of the Quranic process.
Thank you so much. And I just want to pitch it again. I mean, that question is answered in many different portions of this book that I encourage all of you to grab a copy of. after sunset, if you're Muslim, grab a nice drink and spend some time with the book. And really, there's so much reflection that it inspires. So I want to thank so much all of our speakers today for being so gracious with their time and their personal stories and their experiences. To Chaplain Muhammad Ali, Chaplain Sondos Kholakhi, who had to go chaplain, to Sister Jaye Starr, to Imam Kamau Ayubbi of Michigan Medicine, and to Felicity Foundation's new chaplain, Dr. Matthew Schumann, and to all of the co-sponsors of this event. There's a lot of great links to many of the opportunities and programs that the Global Islamic Studies Center offers in the chat right now for you to grab. And a reminder that if you want to hear about similar events from the Global Islamic Studies Center, please sign up for the newsletter. The link should also be in the chat. And to thank all of our attendees for being with us for all this time and engaging in such great questions and thoughtful responses from all of our speakers. Thank you all, and Ramadan Mubarak to all celebrating.
Salam alaikum and jazakallah khair. It was really a tremendous blessing to be with you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum. Again, great to be with you all today and learned a lot.
Yeah, that was a very rich conversation. Are we?